Sarah stared at her reflection in the fitting room mirror and let out her usual sigh. In her youth, she had been considered the prettiest girl in the neighborhood, but now, those extra pounds that appeared after 35 and childbirth had treacherously rounded out her once slender figure. Still, her large brown eyes continued to radiate warmth, and her high cheekbones and sculpted nose betrayed her former beauty. At least my little Tommy loves me just the way I am, she thought, brushing aside the bitter thoughts as she'd grown accustomed to doing. After the divorce, she and her son had moved to a modest apartment in Riverside Heights. Her husband had left her for a young girl from his office, and it had been a devastating blow for Sarah. But as they say, everything happens for a reason. Tommy, her 12-year-old son, had quickly adapted to their new place. He often played basketball in the courtyard, and Sarah loved watching him from her kitchen window. One day, she noticed a blonde-haired boy about Tommy's age watching the game from the balcony of the neighboring building. "Mind if I join?" The point guard on the school team drifted up from the courtyard. Sarah smiled. Her son had just made a new friend. That's how Jennifer and Kevin entered their lives. The young, well-groomed neighbor immediately caught Sarah's attention. Slim figure, trendy haircut, confidence in every movement. Jen looked like she'd stepped right off the cover of Cosmopolitan. Her husband Mike worked at the local fire station nearby, and looking at this family, Sarah sometimes caught herself feeling a twinge of envy. "You know, Jen confessed one day over a cup of coffee, I hit the gym 3 times a week. Mike says it's important to him that his wife stays in shape. You should come with us. It might help you catch yourself a good man." She winked playfully, but Sarah detected a hint of condescension in her voice. Sarah just shook her head. After work, she barely had enough energy for her son and household chores. Besides, something told her it wasn't about the gym at all, but rather about the way some people glowed from within, like Mike did. She often saw him in the courtyard with the kids. Tall and broad-shouldered, he taught the boys how to do pull-ups on the bars and showed them self-defense moves. In those moments, even Tommy looked at him with undisguised admiration. "Mom, guess what? Uncle Mike put out a huge fire in the next district today. Kevin says he was the first one to go into the building." Tommy would share excitedly in the evenings. No one could have imagined that the lives of everyone in this story were about to take a sharp turn. It happened on an ordinary September day. The call caught Sarah at the grocery store. "Turn on the TV. Mike, he's in the hospital." Jennifer's voice broke into sobs. The news showed coverage of a fire in an apartment building in the north side of town. Mike had carried an elderly woman out of the flames, but when he heard the desperate meowing of a cat, he went back into the burning apartment. He managed to get the animal out, throwing it into the rescue net, but at that moment, a burning beam collapsed on him. "Jen, I'm coming right now. Just don't cry. Everything will be okay." Sarah was already dialing her coworker's number, asking for coverage at the store. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and despair. Jennifer paced between the walls, alternating between collapsing onto the hard couch and jumping up again. Her expensive athletic outfit was wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, mascara smeared under her eyes. For the first time, she looked real, without her usual glossy facade. "The doctors, they..." She grabbed Sarah's hand, her acrylic nails digging painfully into the skin. "They're saying it's a spinal fracture. They're saying Mike might never walk again. At all. Can you believe it?" Her voice rose to a shriek, and the nurse shot them a disapproving look. "How am I supposed to deal with him like this? What am I going to?" Jennifer caught herself, bit her lip, but Sarah had already heard that terrible, "with him like this," and everything inside her went cold at the loveless tone. "Shut up!" Sarah shook her friend forcefully by the shoulders. "Do you hear me? Shut up right now. Mike is strong. He's saved so many people, he'll save himself too. We just need to be there for him. Support him. Help him." "Easy for you to say." Jennifer sniffled, smearing her mascara even more. "You don't understand. He won't even be able to use the bathroom by himself. And I'm not cut out for this. I wasn't made for this kind of life." Sarah stared at her beautiful face contorted with anguish and for the first time truly saw Jennifer for who she was inside. Pampered, spoiled, unprepared for life's trials. But all she said aloud was, "You'll learn. We'll all learn. I'll help. Just don't you dare, you hear me? Don't you dare abandon him now." Jennifer nodded, burying her tear-stained face in her friend's shoulder, but Sarah already knew she would leave. It was inevitable, and knowing this made her heart ache even more. That evening, she stayed with Kevin while Jennifer was at the hospital. The boy couldn't fall asleep for a long time. "Aunt Sarah, will Dad really never be able to play basketball with me again?" "He will, sweetheart. Of course he will. We just need to believe in him and help him," she hugged the boy, who looked so much like his father. Life after Mike's injury became divided into before and after. Jen flitted between the hospital and home, trying to adjust to their new reality. Sarah often came over, helped with Kevin, cooked meals. "I'll have to look for a job. Can you believe it? We have so many expenses now," Jen confessed one evening, nervously tapping her spoon against a cup of cold tea. "Mike always wanted me to stay home, take care of the family, keep myself pretty for him. And now, it feels like everything's falling apart." "You'll manage." Sarah carefully covered her hand with her own. "And we'll help. I can watch Kevin while you're at job interviews." "You know, I used to work as a financial analyst before I got married." Jen smiled weakly for the first time that evening. "Think I still remember anything?" Mike was discharged home after a month. Sarah remembered that day. Jen had asked her to check on Mike whenever he called, since the store where she worked was just across the street. Evenings and weekends were the family's responsibility. "Sarah, you have no idea how grateful I am," Jen would say, hurriedly getting ready for her new job. "If it weren't for you." Sarah visited Mike almost every day while his wife was at work. At first, she just helped with the exercises prescribed by the doctor. Then she started reading to him. He loved historical novels, massages, injections, bandage changes. All of this became part of her life. "I can't imagine how we manage without you," Mike said one day while she was helping him with another exercise. Their eyes met and Sarah felt her cheeks betraying her with a blush. She had noticed long ago that she'd started getting nervous in his presence, hanging on his every word, rejoicing at the smallest progress in his rehabilitation. But she deliberately pushed these thoughts away. He had a wife. Even as she was working a lot now, she was just doing a good deed. Meanwhile, Jennifer was spending less and less time at home. First, she started staying late for an hour or two, then began coming home after dark. Reports, meetings, important clients. "I need to integrate into the new team, make an impression." Her explanations sounded increasingly unconvincing. "Mom, why does Aunt Jen come home so late?" Tommy asked one day. "Kevin says she's working even on weekends now." Sarah didn't know what to answer. She saw how Jennifer was changing. She had recovered from the initial shock and was returning to her previous lifestyle. Even more so, new haircut, expensive cosmetics, fashionable outfits. "Mike, I'll be late today. Important meeting. Love you," she would casually throw over her shoulder while applying makeup in the mirror. "Of course, honey," he would reply, and Sarah noticed how his eyes would darken. Jennifer burst into the kitchen around midnight, barely keeping her balance on her designer stilettos. She reeked of expensive bourbon. Sarah." She grabbed her friend's hand, not noticing that she'd knocked over a cup of unfinished tea. "I have to tell you something. I can't keep it inside anymore." Her painted lips trembled, mascara smeared under her eyes. Sarah silently began wiping up the spill on the table. "He loves me, Sarah, and like a fool, I've fallen for him too." Jennifer was almost shouting in a whisper, occasionally breaking into hysterical giggles. "Can you believe it? Like a schoolgirl, with my own boss. God, he's such a man. A real man. Not like." She jerked her head toward the room where Mike lay. "He wants me to move in with him. He has an apartment downtown, a fancy car, connections." Sarah felt nausea rising in her throat. In the next room was a man who had nearly died saving others, and here was his wife, drunkenly babbling about a real man. "What about Kevin?" Sarah's own voice sounded foreign to her. What about Kevin? Jennifer irritably shrugged her shoulder, nearly falling off her chair. I'll take him with me, of course. He'll live downtown, go to a prestigious school. And you, she suddenly grabbed Sarah's hand with a death grip. You won't abandon Mike, will you? You'll look after him. I see how you look at him. She delivered the last words with a drunken smirk. Sarah yanked her hand away and ran out of the apartment, choking on tears. A week later, Jennifer packed her bags. Sarah helped Kevin pack his textbooks and toys, trying not to meet the boy's eyes. What can you say to a child when his mother is leaving his disabled father for another man? Mike silently watched the packing from his room. Only his jaw muscles worked on his stone-like face, and his fingers gripped the wheelchair armrests so tightly that his knuckles turned white. That same evening, Sarah saw familiar figures through her window on the playground. Tommy and Kevin sat on the swings, the same ones where their friendship had begun. Why did Mom do this? Kevin's voice was breaking. Dad, he's a hero. He saved that old lady and the cat, and now he can't even walk because of it. And is this how people are supposed to act? Tommy swung silently beside him, occasionally kicking the ground with his sneaker. You know, he finally said when my dad left, I didn't understand why either. Mom says adults sometimes do stupid things. But your dad was healthy. Kevin jumped off the swing abruptly. And mine. You see what he's like now. How could she leave him right when this happened? I hate her. Tommy stood up too, putting his hand on his friend's shoulder. But now Mom's helping your dad. She's good, she won't leave. And you can come over whenever you can. Really? Kevin sniffled. You promise? Pinky swear. Tommy held out his fist for their traditional greeting. We're buddies, aren't we? Sarah stepped away from the window, wiping away tears. Her heart was bursting with pride for her son and aching for these boys who had encountered betrayal by their loved ones so early in life. The days dragged on. Sarah continued visiting Mike, who was now completely alone, cooking, giving massages, helping with exercises. Sometimes they just talked, and she noticed how his eyes would warm up when she entered the room. He never spoke a word about Jennifer, as if she had never existed in his life. Progress in his recovery was slow but steady. First, Mike learned to sit up by himself, then began moving around with the help of a walker. Each of his successes resonated in Sarah's heart with joy, as if they were her own victories. You know, he said one day during their evening exercises, I've been wanting to tell you, you're amazing. Not everyone is capable of selflessly caring for a stranger like this. You're not a stranger to me at all, Sarah blurted out before she could bite her tongue. But in her heart, only one desire burned like fire, to confess her true feelings to Mike. If only she could find the courage to take this most important step. That evening, Sarah finally decided to confess. She spent a long time thinking about how to start this serious conversation. Unfortunately, she had to stay late at the store. A large shipment of the fall collection had arrived. She hurried to Mike's place anxiously, turning over in her mind what if he still loved and waited for his wife, and would reject her. After all, she wasn't nearly as beautiful, and with all the caregiving duties, she even gained a couple more pounds, when suddenly her phone burst into a ring. Mom, she's back. Her son's voice trembled with excitement. Aunt Jen, she and Kevin are heading up to Uncle Mike's right now. Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat. She wanted to sink to the ground and burst into tears. When she reached the familiar building, she witnessed an unusual scene. Mike stood in the doorway of the apartment, leaning on his walker. His broad shoulders filled the entire frame. In front of him, nervously fidgeting with the strap of her expensive purse, Jennifer paced back and forth. A tearful Kevin pressed himself against the wall. Mike, darling, my love. Jennifer rushed to threshold but froze when she met his gaze. I've realized everything. I understand now. He's nothing compared to you. You're my hero. Please, let me come back. Mike stood leaning on his walker, towering over her like a mountain, silent. I was such a fool. Jen stepped forward, her perfectly made-up face contorting. You know, he turned out to be married. That snake. Can you believe it? He lied to me about everything. But you're real. You're a real man. I tell everyone now what a wonderful husband I have. What a treasure you are. You have. Mike's quiet voice carried such steel that Jennifer recoiled. You don't have a hero anymore, Jen. You made your choice when you traded your disabled husband for a boss with prospects. No, no, don't say that. That's nonsense. She collapsed to her knees, grabbing at his walker, not noticing how her expensive skirt was getting dirty on the floor. I love you. I've always loved you. I'll take care of you, do everything for you. Just like that Sarah woman. Oh, she bit her tongue, but it was too late. The muscles in Mike's jaw tightened. Get up. You're pathetic. Please, don't send me away, she begged, smearing her mascara across her cheeks. I'll do anything. Want me to quit my job? I'll stay home like before. Cook, clean, bathe you. Just forgive me. Dad, Kevin whimpered from his spot against the wall. Mike turned his gaze to the son, and for the first time, his face softened. Son, you can come over whenever you want. Always. The door is open for you. What about me? Jennifer tried to stand but twisted her ankle in her stiletto and sank back to the floor. Mike, I'm the mother of your child. Are you really ready to throw everything away like this? Who are you? He looked down at her. You're just a woman who betrayed her husband when he couldn't walk, who abandoned him as soon as someone more convenient came along. And now you've crawled back when you got dumped yourself. Like a parasite. He paused. You know what, Jen? I can forgive you for falling out of love with me. But the way you did it, get out of here. Mike. Out. He closed the door on her sobs, and the metallic click of the lock sounded like the period at the end of their story. The next day, Sarah didn't go to Mike's. For the first time in many months, she couldn't. After yesterday's scene with Jennifer's return, all her feelings were tangled up, turned into a tight knot in her chest. She paced around her apartment, unable to find peace, starting to cook, then abandoning it, picking up cleaning. But that didn't help either. She called the store, called in sick. For the first time since she started working there, she took a sick day. Tommy left for school, and the solitude hit her with renewed force. God, what am I doing? Sarah whispered, looking at her reflection in the mirror. I've fallen in love with someone else's husband. Yes, they split up, but suddenly there was a metallic noise outside her apartment door. Sarah startled, automatically smoothing her house dress. Through the peephole, she could see an empty landing. Strange. She opened the door and froze. Mike stood on the landing one floor below, heavily leaning on his walker. Red-faced, sweating from exertion, but with a determined gleam in his eyes. Next to the walker leaned a bouquet of wildflowers, presumably bought from the old ladies who sold them in the courtyard. Mike? Sarah's breath caught. What are you? How did you? You haven't left the house once since. He caught his breath. I did it myself. First time out by myself, though it took about 40 minutes. You're crazy. She rushed toward him. Wait, let me help. No. There was such steel in his voice that Sarah froze mid-step. I need to do this myself. Have to do this myself. Slowly, very slowly, he began climbing the stairs. Sarah watched as his hands trembled, how sweat rolled down his temples, how the walker creaked under the strain. One flight of stairs, just one flight, an eternity. There, he exhaled, finally reaching her landing. He bent down for the flowers, wobbled. Now can I? Sarah picked up the bouquet herself. Simple daisies, cornflowers, and tansy. So familiar, so summery. Come in and sit down for heaven's sake. You need to rest. No, he shook his head. I need to say something first. That's why I came. His chest heaved with heavy breathing. His t-shirt was soaked through, but his eyes shone with the same light they had long ago when he was teaching the boys pull-ups in the courtyard. Sarah, he closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. I wanted to tell you that I'm filing for divorce. Officially. Enough of this charade. Mike, you don't have to explain yourself to me. She hugged the flowers to her chest like a shield. I do. Because He suddenly smiled his old boyish smile. Because I love you, Sarah. Have for a long time now. Ever since you started coming over, helping, fussing over me when you didn't have to. When you would read aloud while I couldn't even hold a book. When you would cry secretly, thinking I couldn't see after particularly difficult exercises. When you stayed up nights with Kevin while Jen, he broke off. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I love you. And I want you and Tommy. I want you to live with me at my place. If you both want to. Sarah stood silent, crushing the bouquet in her hands. Tears rolled down her cheeks and she didn't wipe them away. I know it sounds strange, he laughed nervously. What kind of husband am I now? Barely managing with a walker. You idiot, she sobbed. What an idiot you are, Mike. She stepped forward, hugged him, buried her face in his damp t-shirt. The flowers scattered across the floor. You're the best, the absolute best. And to hell with the walker. So, can I take that as a yes? His hands trembled as he stroked her hair. Yes, only. Let's have you move in with us. You've got 4 flights without an elevator at your place, and we're on the 2nd floor. He laughed, for the first time in many months, openly and happily. My practical girl already figured everything out. Well, somebody has to think in this family. Family. How easily that word slipped off her tongue. How right it sounded. At that moment, footsteps were heard on the stairs. Tommy and Kevin were returning from school. The boys froze on the landing, staring in amazement at the scene. Flowers scattered across the floor, Sarah crying and laughing at the same time, a beaming Mike still leaning on his walker. Dad? Kevin said uncertainly. Mom, Tommy echoed. Come here, you rascals. Mike held out his arm. Looks like we have a lot to discuss. Sarah looked at their faces, confused, surprised, but already beginning to brighten with understanding, and thought that this was what happiness looked like. It wasn't about beauty or long legs or trendy clothes. Even with extra weight, something else mattered entirely. Happiness was about simply being there, loving, supporting, and believing in each other no matter what happened.